but the Africa Tobacco Control Alliance and the Global Alliance for Tobacco Control. My friend, Africa and global. Today we are surrounded by greatness. Selim, please, I hope you are now able to share your
Yeah.
screen.
Please confirm if you can see the
Yes,
screen.
yes, you can see the screen. Karibu sana.
Thank you. And that
Take it away.
profile is amazing. But yes, sometimes I'm not sure you're talking about me, but thank you very much. So I've put on my camera so that guys can see me. Good evening,
Yeah.
everyone. And Rachel, thank you very much for allowing me to present before you. So I'll go right into it. I was requested to talk about industry monitoring and looking at the front groups and what we have in the FCTC concerning tobacco industry monitoring and response. So I apologize that what I'm going to talk about, some of it the foundation would have been laid by in Rachel's presentation. So please bear with me. So now that you have seen my face, I will just put on the camera and we'll continue. So let me see, it's not moving. Okay. So the International Institute for Legislative Affairs, or ILA, is a not-for-profit organization. So we work on policy issues. We work with stakeholders in the policy process. And our work is championing policies that address the problems that Kenyans face. And we do that through a number of programs, including health governance, where we work on the risk factors for NCDs, including road safety and injuries. We also work in the program of tax justice and natural resource governance. So in tobacco control specifically, ILA has been here for, I think, maybe close to 20 years. So we learn and we take up from our pioneers like Rachel and proceed with the work. So I'm going to just take us through what the tobacco industry is. We want to understand the strategies that they use, including the front groups, and the examples of how the industry interferes in Kenya. I'll speak generally, specifically to how the industry is targeting the youth. We will give a couple of examples in interference in tax. So tobacco industry is defined in various ways, and we have this defined in the World Health Organization framework for framework convention for tobacco control, which Rachel will take us through more elaborately. But the FCTC defines the tobacco industry as including manufacturers, wholesale distributors, including even importers of tobacco products. Then we have domesticated the FCTC in our tobacco
Hello guys, I can't hear from
Salim.
side.
Hi, Salim. We've lost your audio for the last minute or so. Tobacco industry wamemfanyia ile kitu. So just give us a minute to see if she'll come back. Just give us a minute to check on her.
I hope you're trying to check through WhatsApp because she's not in Kenya.
Yes, through WhatsApp.
Okay.
Hi, Benjamin. Sorry, I dropped off.
All right, welcome back.
Okay. I hope now.
It seems the industry has stressed you where you are.
Yes. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so I don't know where I dropped off from, but I was just talking about the tobacco industry. And so essentially, tobacco industry includes everyone who works for the agenda of the industry. So along the value chain, right from growing, manufacturing, to the distribution, to selling. So you think about all the actors that may be within this value chain, then those would be considered as tobacco industry. And so now going into tobacco industry interference. So what is this? We also have this in our regulation, and our regulations define tobacco industry interference as any commercial or vested interest that the tobacco industry, remember the actors and the players we described along the value chain. So any interest, commercial or vested interest that they have to subvert or undermine the development, implementation, or enforcement of public health policies, measures, and laws that pertain to tobacco control. So that is what we call interference. So any actions that the tobacco industry takes along the process of the policy, from development to even implementation, or even interfering with enforcement. So sometimes when the tobacco industry violates the laws that we have, then it is their way of interfering with the effective implementation of tobacco control laws. Then we have the FCTC Article 5.3. This is the article in the treaty that empowers civil society organizations, government, and all actors to actively monitor the industry and respond to the interference from the industry. So the preamble of the FCTC states that when government is setting, or parties, so parties are the countries that have ratified the FCTC, and Kenya is a party. So when parties like Kenya is setting and implementing public health policies, that we must act to protect these policies from commercial and other vested interests of the tobacco industry in accordance with the national law. So this empowers us to domesticate this article in our legislation, and Rachel will take us through what the FCTC contains and how we have domesticated it. But rather, this actually empowers us to protect our public health policies from the interference of tobacco industry. So then how does the industry interfere? What strategies do they use? So there are several strategies and tactics that the industry applies to interfere with tobacco control policies. And these can be summarized, and have been summarized in 6 main areas or methods through which they interfere. So one is that the industry will maneuver and hijack the political and legislative process. So this is, the industry coming out as, a contributor to the political and legislative processes in the country. But really what they do is to hijack it to speak to their own agenda. So we have seen that even in Kenya. So let's say there's a political issue going on, or getting involved in conversations in policy and legislation. And the idea is they would not do it as themselves, but using the front groups that I will discuss as we move along, and to influence the process to their advantage. And of course, when they do that, then it is to the disadvantage of public health and tobacco control. The other way that through which they interfere is exaggerating their importance and economic contribution to the country. And this is very common across, even in Kenya, we have seen this a lot. So every time, especially around budget process, and we're talking about tobacco taxes, the industry will say we contribute a lot to the economy through employment, through providing, a livelihood for the actors in the space like tobacco farmers. Yet, when you compare what the government gets from, revenue from the industry and what we spend in taking care of the health, economic, social, environmental costs of tobacco, then you really cannot compare. The latter is way more than what we get from government. So for example, BAT, for the past, I think 7 or so years in a row, they've been voted as the top best employer in the country. I think they even have now been voted as the best employer even in Africa. So using such narratives, then they will always sell that message that, when you increase taxes on tobacco, there are people likely to lose jobs. I don't know, people who work in the retail business, the farmers and all that. Yet that is just a tactic that then they use to avoid or even downplay the need for stronger tobacco control policies such as taxation. The other tactic through which they interfere is manipulating public opinion and paint a picture that make them look like they're respectable, for instance, by providing sponsorships. And this is particularly, we see this a lot through programs called corporate social responsibility programs. And again, BAT has over several years supported CSR programs in the country around, especially the environment. They like doing that a lot. You will hear that during World Environment Day, they are providing seedlings. They are partnering with universities to plant trees. They are partnering with, I don't know which other entities. They are, showing themselves as partners in implementing the SDGs around environment factors like energy. I think they've been awarded a number of times by Kenya Association of Manufacturers as being on their ESG, the economic, environmental, social governance programs. Another thing which I also show later is BAT provides sponsorships and scholarships for the youth. They've partnered with a number of universities in the country to provide, so either through internship, and all this is just a way of manipulating our opinion as the public that they are good actors, they are good people, they are concerned about the environment, they're concerned about youth unemployment and education, but really this is just a tactic through which they interfere with the tobacco control policy. Then also get support through front groups. Remember the definition of tobacco industry, it is not just the manufacturers, but also the other entities that speak for the industry. So using those front groups, then they stand behind the front groups and get support of the front groups to speak on their behalf. And we have quite a number of them in Kenya, including Kenya Association of Manufacturers. So you go to meetings, BAT will not be there or Mastermind will not be there, but CAM will be there. And when you hear what they are saying, they are speaking for the industry. So advocating and advancing and championing the agenda of the industry. We've seen that in a number of meetings, like a couple of years ago, when Kenya was developing standards on oral nicotine pouches. CAM will speak very strongly for the industry. Then they also discredit proven science. I mean, when you look at the current wave of the new nicotine tobacco products and the evidence that, so he has given it still a new space and a lot of research is still needed and still ongoing, but even in that recent data, there's a lot that we are seeing that, that has already been established, that nicotine is harmful, nicotine is a poison, nicotine causes addiction, nicotine affects, can trigger or exacerbate cardiovascular problems, including stroke and all that. Yet they discredit this and themselves even make their own data to discredit that. And it is on that wave they're riding to market and sell these products as what they call, quote unquote, less harmful products. So even with science that has been there, and this is not new. Way back, Rachel will tell you that way back when the fight against tobacco started, the top executives of tobacco manufacturing in the world tried to convince the world that nicotine is not addictive, that tobacco cigarettes are not harmful. And there's normally a photo that is online where they are actually raising their hands. I think it was before a Congress hearing that they confirm, they swear that tobacco is not harmful, that nicotine is not addictive. And later, what has come out, tobacco is harmful, nicotine is addictive and is poisonous, yet they're still discrediting and challenging that evidence to market these new products that target the youth. The other way they interfere is through litigation, and Kenya has been a victim of this. We've had one of the longest cases in the region that was a petition by BAT against the tobacco control regulations that went through the different ranks of the court until Supreme Court. So this is a tool that the industry uses very quickly, that every time they are displeased with something in the law, they'll go to court. And I think even now, with the process that is going on for the graphic health warnings in one of the public participation meetings, BAT MD actually mentioned that some of the things that the government is proposing are things that, can even be challenged in court. So this is one strategy they use to, disrupt the entire legislative process and regulatory framework to delay implementation of the regulations. Like for our regulations that were challenged in court, the regulations were adopted in 2014, but the court case took 5 years. So for those 5 years, the government was really limited in terms of what it could implement. So delaying the process of implementing, and when they're delaying that process, they are, you look at it from the perspective that how many more lives are being lost during that time when the industry is in court with government. So, or to dilute the process, dilute the law that is there. So they're not happy with one thing, then, challenge it in court so that it is compromised, or just derail the entire process. So these are the known strategies that the tobacco industry uses to interfere with tobacco control policies. So how then does the industry specifically target the youth and children? So we know that young people are vulnerable in many ways. And when we talk about tax specifically, tax measures are actually meant to protect more the youth and children, as well as populations that are in the lower socioeconomic stratas. So because of that vulnerability, these groups are very sensitive to price changes. They are sensitive, and also their disposable income is limited. Yet they face the burden more severely when they have, the problems associated with tobacco use. So, for example, be it an NCD and that sort of thing. And the industry knows that very well. That's why they cry on the children and the young people who are vulnerable. The other aspect with the youth is that, and looking at Kenya, the youthful population is more than 70%. We know that unemployment levels are quite high in our country. So what that provides a very good opportunity for the industry to exploit and manipulate this segment. So look at some of these programs that BAT runs. So I actually just looked at the website of a few universities and found this. So probably amongst the audience here, a number of you probably have go to these institutions. Maybe you've seen this around. And this is it may, I would understand that on one side somebody is looking for an opportunity for internship or to get a scholarship, and they look very, very lucrative. And the industry knows, they know exactly what they're doing, and that is why they come up with these proposals. This battle of minds, it's a competition that has been running. I think the last one I saw was like 2024, if I'm not wrong. And then there's the internship program, which they call the Next Gen. So the problem here is that our institutions are not sensitized, and the education, the stakeholders in the education sector are not alive to these facts that you can have the industry coming in looking like a sheep, but inside it's a wolf. So the other way that the industry targets the young and this vulnerable population is through designing new products like what we have now flooding the market. These new, sleek-looking nicotine products, or the oral nicotine pouches or electronic cigarettes that are designed specifically for this target. Those products are not for people my age. They are not for adults, because they are specifically designed to target the youth. And remember, we said that industry interference goes through all the way to enforcement and implementation of the laws that we have. So when you look at these products, they use flavors that are attractive to children. They are marketed on the same spaces and platforms that the youth and children frequent. And then, using activities. So every time there's a new product, I remember when First Lift came in, there were a number of activations in universities or parties and clubs and that sort of thing. And then, of course, using the harm reduction narrative that we talked about, that these products are supposedly less harmful and are meant to help people quit. So these are things that we need to be keen on. We need to be alive to these realities, that we need to see it for what it is and call it out, for what it is, that this is not the industry being supportive. These are CSR activities that they are using to wash themselves and look like they are good and partners in tobacco control when they are not. So why is it important to engage in industry monitoring? This is because the FCTC again tells us that we need to be alert to the efforts of the tobacco industry, and we need to take all efforts that we can to be able to prevent, the industry from subverting or undermining tobacco control policies. So this is not something that we just do, because we don't have anything else to do. It is a requirement, it's an obligation, and we must then ensure that we monitor and we expose and call out the industry when they interfere, because it is established that there can never be any one time that the interest of the tobacco industry can ever align with the interest of public health. So now specifically on Article 5.3 and the implementation guidelines. So this is the article that empowers us in industry interference monitoring and response. And parties are called upon to remember that we can never have a point where we have the interest of the tobacco industry and public health aligning. And therefore, we must act to protect these policies from the tobacco industry. So Article 5.3 implementation guidelines has principles that guide parties in developing policies and frameworks to on industry interference or ensuring accountability, ensuring that industry does not interfere. So these principles are four, and one of them is just recognizing that there is a fundamental irreconcilable conflict. We've already talked about that. Parties are also called upon to be accountable and transparent when they are dealing with the tobacco industry. And this should only be to the extent that it is around enforcement of the tobacco control policies. Again, parties must ensure that they hold the tobacco industry accountable and ensure that they operate and act transparently and accountably and in line with the laid down policies and laws. So this also includes ensuring that they don't violate like the things that we've just seen, how the industry interferes or targets young people. I mean, advertisement, promotion, and sponsorship of tobacco products is prohibited in Kenya. So what is our government doing to ensure that the industry operates within that framework that has been set, that they are transparent and they are accountable? The other principle is that because it's clear that the products that this industry manufactures is lethal, the tobacco industry must never be granted any incentives. So either to establish or to run their businesses. 3 years ago, BAT wanted a tax holiday or a tax exemption to manufacture nicotine pouches. By then, they were selling under the brand name Lift. We challenged this, we made a lot of noise in this, we wrote to KRA, because it is illegal. You cannot grant any preferential treatments or incentives to the industry, because that is actually aiding them to continue developing the harmful products that are harming our economy, are harming our health, environment, and our social fabrics in the community. So then what does the article and guidelines recommend? Number one, we are called upon to raise awareness about the addictive and harmful nature of tobacco and nicotine products. And that is part of what we are doing here. And thank you very much, SCAD, for convening young people so that we can talk to them about this, because then you can also carry this message to your peers that we are called upon to raise awareness about the addictive and harmful nature of tobacco products. It is also recommended that we establish measures that limit interactions with the tobacco industry to ensure transparency if these interactions occur. Remember, we talked about the guiding principles about accountability and transparency. Now we need to establish those measures to limit those interactions. And one of the things that we have in our tobacco control regulations, and I believe Rachel will take us through that in detail, is that we need to have a code of conduct that guides government officials in their interactions with the tobacco industry, because at some point these meetings may need to occur. And as I said, meetings that or conversations that are around, enforcement, those ones at some point they need to happen. But if they must happen, they need to happen within certain laid framework and parameters. For instance, there needs to be a very clear agenda. The people who are participating in the meeting have to be known. The minutes of the meeting have to be published and even shared publicly. But unfortunately, that's not what happens in Kenya. The past few years, we have really deteriorated in an index that is normally done every 2 years on how countries are ranked in terms of the level of tobacco industry in their country. And part of what led us to have that such a bad score is because government was found to be holding several meetings with the tobacco industry without even sharing that information. So in an ideal situation, there should be even, let's say an online portal where it is a notice is placed that MOH will be meeting BAT on such and such a day, and this is the agenda, and these are the people who are coming. And even for us in tobacco control space, when you're attending meetings, then you need to declare any conflict of interest if they're there. So, and the process is documented very well, and the information is provided. That creates transparency and enhances accountability. The other recommendation is to reject partnerships and agreements in the tobacco industry. So, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think it was in 2021 or thereabout, BAT partnered with or offered to partner with Kiambu County to hold World Environment Day, I think. So such partnerships have to be rejected. In 2020-21, during COVID, BAT donated a lot of money, materials such as sanitizers. Those are the partnerships that come in as CSR that should be rejected. Government cannot and must not partner with the tobacco industry. Then avoid conflict of interest for government officials. It is not just for government, but also for stakeholders working in tobacco control, that we need to have a system of declaring this. And I don't know, maybe Rachel will also tell you that even at the international level, during the meetings of where countries that have ratified the FCTC meet every 2 years to assess how countries are doing in implementing the FCTC. This issue has always come up that countries need to adopt and deliberately be declaring conflicts of interest. So you'll be surprised that up there, this is information that people don't want to say, that either they have worked with the tobacco industry or are working for the tobacco industry or something like that. So those conflicts of interest have to be avoided, and they have to be declared if they're there, and then if they're there, then addressed accordingly. Then we need to also share, provide information, that is the industry, that the information they provide must be transparent and accurate. So this is just to avoid manipulating and lies. The industry can never be trusted. So there needs to be systems. So for instance, in terms of when government is regulating the industry and there is information that needs to be provided about their products, have a mechanism or some prescribed manner through which that information, the critical information that is required, should be provided. So that is the mechanism that then government provides, and ensure that the tobacco industry provides that information as is expected. Then try to regulate the CSR activities. So this is another area that as Kenya we haven't done a lot in. So yes, we have prohibited tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, but the tobacco industry still moves around and implements certain CSR activities. So having a comprehensive regulatory framework or regulations around CSR activities, especially pertaining to tobacco industry. Then we talked about this, about not giving preferential treatment to the tobacco industry. So always tobacco industry should be treated as it is an industry that is manufacturing disease and death, and not give any preferential treatment, some sort of maybe trade agreements or taxes or enforcement or other compliance with existing tobacco control laws. Lastly, the tobacco industry should be treated the same, whether it is state-owned. So there are some countries that have tobacco industries that are owned by government. And I think even in Kenya, some years back, you find that government or government officials have shares in either BAT or Mastermind Tobacco. So whether the government has interest or shares in that tobacco company, it has to be treated the same way as the other companies, not being given any preferential treatments. So how then do we counter tobacco industry? So for us, I think in Kenya, largely it's an issue of enforcing what you already have, because we are amongst a few countries that have these recommendations written down into our tobacco control regulations. So we need to enforce. Number one, like develop the code of conduct that we should have, provide a framework, clear framework within which the industry is expected to provide information, or a framework for when they are interacting with government, and that sort of thing. then we also need to, never forget who the tobacco industry is. Remember, it's not just the manufacturers, it is all the players in the supply chain. Then actively monitor and track the activities of the tobacco industry as they youth. I mean, you are exposed to many things that are targeted to you, and being in the digital space and the way the matrices work, the algorithms work in the digital space, that there are some things that certain population groups see that others do not see. So there are some things that you see that maybe somebody else my age may not see, depending on how, the industry has profiled people. So when you see this information, please speak out, reach out to SCAD, document this information, and, reach out even in terms of getting the messages that you can use to protect yourself and to counter the influence and the interference from the industry. Then, of course, speak out, expose this and speak out. And yeah, I think it's just calls upon us, especially as young people, to be vigilant and to, use the platforms that we have to share this information widely and to reach out to the experts and the support groups in the space like SCAD, to be able to get the information on how to protect yourself and to counter the tobacco industry. And that is all from me. Thank you very much. And back to you, Benjamin. I can hang out for a short while in case there are any questions. Thank you.
Yes. Wow, 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 wow. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. That's in-depth. Tumpigieni makofi kwa the reactions, tafadhali. Yesterday, you were shown how to use the reactions to appreciate and clap. So we can just do that. And if you have any question, any comment, please do throw it in the chat for the next couple of minutes. Then we will invite back Rachel as we wait for those questions. It was interesting, Celine, and thank you for introducing us to the aspect of tobacco industry interference. Often, for the people not in the know, it can easily fly by without taking notice. So it's really exciting that you brought us to that level of understanding and also introduced us to the FCTC Article 5.3. So in respect to tobacco industry interference, just identifying the actions of the industry that subvert or derail the development and implementation of policies, laws, measures, around tobacco control. Then FCTC 5.3 urging us now to take action to protect these policies from commercial and other sorts of interests. So that's really powerful for me. And that they are manufacturers of death and disease. How many times do we hear that? An industry that manufactures death and disease, unashamedly so. And they take every measure possible to ensure that stays the case. All right, so we have the first question in respect to calling out the industry's actions and misinformation. That means we don't need to be affiliated with any organization to call them out. Any evidence of misinformation and interference with public health policies and tobacco control policies should be highlighted and shared with advocacy stakeholders appropriately. Certainly, David, we don't need to be affiliated to SCAD, to ILA, to Makabe Center, to Den of Hope, or MCD Alliance from yesterday, or the other organizations. Once you identify it, call it out, just highlight it. We have a question from Patrick. What are some of the key measures recommended to limit the influence of the tobacco industry on public health policies? That's an exciting question. Celine, you want to take that? I know you've already highlighted it, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the feedback. This is great. So there are a number of things that can be taken. Number one is first set the framework for one, limiting interaction with the industry. So that is at the government level. So remember, in the guiding principles under Article 5.3, and the recommendations are that we need to ensure accountability and transparency. So for Kenya, we have that in our law, that we need to have a code of conduct. So provide that framework and implement it and enforce it. Number two is we need to be vigilant in monitoring also compliance now across the other broad areas of tobacco control, and calling them out when they do not play by the book or by the rule. So the other way is to, anytime there are these issues happening, we document and then we use that to expose what they are doing. So depending on where you are, like at our level here with this audience, monitor online the things that you're seeing that do not make sense, document, expose, call them out. At the policy level, we need to ensure that the industry is not in the same room when we are discussing public health policies or tobacco control policies. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Celine. That is a very elaborate, simple, straightforward answer. Code of conduct, vigilance, monitoring and exposing, documenting, monitoring, documenting, and exposing. Very, very critical, very, very instrumental. Wow. I see no other question yet, but if it does come up, I will definitely raise it to you, Celine. We are also collecting all the questions that are coming up and compiling them. Then we'll provide elaborate responses in a written format that is accessible online. All right, so at the top of the hour, I would like to bring back Rachel. After that exciting presentation from Celine, it can only get more exciting. So Rachel, karibu sana, take the floor.
Thank you, Benja. Let me share again.
Yeah.
Okay. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Why am I not seeing the buttons for moving it around? There we are. So we are going to go through the provisions of the WHO FCTC, and after each provision, we'll then look at how that has been implemented in Kenya, and if there are any places where Kenya is failing or is not meeting the international standards set in the FCTC, we are going to point that out. So starting off with what is the FCTC, yesterday you heard about the immense social, economic, health, and environmental impact of tobacco use. And so globally, why is it moving itself? When the world appreciated this, they started negotiations for a treaty. And so WHO has treaty-making power and Article 19 of the WHO Constitution. And this is the one and only treaty that they have negotiated. And given what they went through in getting the treaty and the subsequent difficulties, there is not much appetite for another one. So I know alcohol has been asking for a similar treaty, but there doesn't seem to be traction for that. And so the fact that it's a treaty is like law at international level, and it is signed by states. So once you sign and ratify the treaty, it becomes legally binding upon you, and you are obligated at your country level to implement your obligations. So the negotiations took place between 1998 and 2004, and then it was opened for signature. So Kenya was among the first 40 countries to sign this treaty. And once it reached 40 parties, it then entered into force on 27th February 2005. And currently it has 182 parties. So it's the most widely signed treaty of all the treaties in the UN family. And so some of the basic principles underpinning this treaty, the first is that it is evidence-based. And so given that this treaty was being worked on in 1998, and the dangers of tobacco use have been evident since the 1960s, there are countries that had already started implementing some of these measures. And so when they were picking what they should put into the treaty and basically what measures they should adopt, they were looking at the evidence coming from countries. And so very often the tobacco industry will try to say, oh, bans on advertising don't work. The truth is countries that have banned advertising have seen how it works. And so literally every provision in this treaty has got an evidence base. And there are enough literature reviews, studies that have been carried out to prove that these measures work. The second is that it's grounded in human rights. And so when you read the preamble to the WHO FCTC, it talks first about the right to health. So of course, WHO talks about the right to the highest possible standard of health in terms of human beings attaining that. But other rights that are grounded in this treaty is protection of children based on the Convention of the Rights to the Rights of the Child, protection of women from discrimination, and even eventually the right to life. The next one Celine has just talked about is protection from tobacco industry interference. And as she said, there's an irreconcilable difference between what the tobacco industry wants, which is profit, and what we want, which is healthy people. And they sell a product that guarantees bad health. And so for this, every time when you read through the FCTC, they'll talk about effective measures. And if a measure is effective, it will harm the tobacco industry's profits. And that is the reason why they interfere. And so when someone asked, why must we protect from industry interference? It is to avoid ineffective provisions being adopted by a country and ineffectiveness in how they are carried out. And then the last is multi-sectoral collaboration. And so tobacco control is not just a health issue. You see that there are provisions on sustainable livelihoods for farmers that takes you into the realm of agriculture. If you're going to talk about enforcement, you're talking about the police. If you're going to talk about illicit trade and taxes, you're bringing in finance and revenue. And so to do tobacco control properly at a country level, you then need to work across all these different ministries. So we like saying that the FCTC is a floor and not a ceiling. And so what this means is that the provisions in the FCTC are the bare minimum. Countries are allowed to go over and above what the FCTC says. So for example, the tobacco industry on graphic health warnings or health warnings on packets, like saying the FCTC says that it should be a minimum of 30% on the front and 50% on the back. Why are you asking for bigger warnings? The answer is it's a floor and not a ceiling. So 30-50 is the minimum. You can even go up to 100. And parties are actually encouraged to go over and above what the FCTC says based on their national context. And the second is that the FCTC is comprehensive. And so the measures are complementary. So you cannot pick and choose which one you will implement. So Article 30 says you cannot have reservations. In treaty language, when signing a treaty, you can say, I accept Article 1, 3, and 5, but I refuse 7 and 9. But for the FCTC, it's expressly written, there can be no reservations. So any country that signs the treaty must implement everything in the treaty. And so very often the tobacco industry will come and say, why are you trying to raise taxes? Just concentrate on educating the children, run school programs. It's not either or. All of them must be done at the same time. So no policy is a substitute or an alternative for another. They're all complementary. So the obligations under the treaty are divided into two. So you have got demand reduction measures. And so tax and price, which is in Article 6, I think we'll have a session on that tomorrow. So I won't talk about that today. And the other demand reduction measures is protection from exposure to tobacco smoke, Article 8, regulating and disclosing contents of tobacco products, Articles 9 and 10, packaging and labeling of tobacco products, which includes the health warnings, Article 11, the need for education and awareness on tobacco harms, Article 12, tobacco advertising, promotion and sponsorship, Article 13, and cessation or getting people to stop smoking, Article 14. Now, all of those is the demand from the users, the smokers, yeah? And so these are measures to reduce the number of smokers in the world. But we also address supply. And so supply is the amount of products in the market. And so for that, you've got Article 15 on illicit trade. And basically, this is dealing with products that have not paid taxes, products that are not meeting health warning requirements, and any other kind of requirement. And illicit trade is important because it leads to cheaper tobacco products, which then increases the supply and eventually also the demand. And then the protection of minors or children is in Article 16, and the need for alternative livelihoods, not just for tobacco farmers, but anybody else in that chain is in Article 17. Then you have a few other measures. So you've got protection of the environment in Article 18. And so this came about because there were many countries that were growing tobacco. And I think you were told yesterday, tobacco was very detrimental to the environment. So the deforestation, the leaching of chemicals into rivers and pollution of water sources. And so there's an article there to deal with that. And then because this is an industry deliberately selling a harmful product, knowing it kills people, a provision on how to hold them liable for the harm that they cause, which is Article 19, and then a series of articles on international cooperation, so collaborating on research, Article 20, provisions on how to report, Article 21, how countries can cooperate with one another, and on how to resource tobacco control. There are a couple of institutions set up by the treaty, and so occasionally you will hear about them. So the first is what is called the Conference of the Parties, or the COP, that is set up in Article 23. And this is a meeting that brings together all the parties to the treaty, and it meets once every 2 years. So once you sign the treaty, you're entitled to attend the meeting. You can send your delegation. And during the COP, they basically take decisions such as, do we need any further guidance from WHO? So WHO can be requested to submit a research report. Do we need to flesh out a provision of the convention? So a working group can be set up to come and give more information on what the obligation is, and so on. And so people who have not ratified the convention can attend the COP, but they don't have an automatic right to be able to address the COP. And then lastly, there's a secretariat based in Geneva that helps countries, provides technical assistance, and so on. Then lastly, you'll hear about guidelines. And so guidelines are, from a local perspective, you'd have like the Parent Act. So we have the Tobacco Control Act. And then you've got subsidiary legislation that gives further detail. So in the context of the treaty, that is what guidelines are. And we have guidelines on Article 6, Article 8, Article 5.3, Article 12, 14, 17 and 18, 9 and 10. And so very often the tobacco industry keeps on saying, oh, the guidelines are not binding, but they are. It's a long legal argument. I won't explain why, but the short answer is the guidelines are also binding. So they're just intended to show the best practice, and they're done by the parties subsequent to the treaty. And then lastly, the treaty has got a protocol. So a protocol is like a baby of the treaty, but it's a separate treaty. So once you're a member of the FCTC, you can also sign on to the protocol. And this is a protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products. So this protocol has got less parties, partly because it was negotiated afterwards. And so currently it has got 67 parties, Kenya being one of them. So in terms of Kenya's legal framework for tobacco control, Kenya signed and ratified the FCTC in June 2004, and the treaty entered into force for Kenya in February 2005. And so what this means is that from 2005, we had an obligation to implement the treaty. And the way in which you implement a treaty is that you pass domestic legislation. So between 2004 to 2007, we were lobbying for domestic legislation, which is the Tobacco Control Act, and we got that in 2007. And then because we needed further detail, we worked on the implementing regulations, and these were adopted in 2014. And so as we go through the presentation, I'll be highlighting for you what is contained in the Act and the regulations for each of those FCTC measures. And then we raise taxes through a separate act, which is the Excise Duty Act, and every year through finance bills. And then we also banned shisha in 2017. And then sitting on top of all of that is the Constitution. And so within the Bill of Rights, the rights that pertain to tobacco control is the right to life, the right to health, the right to freedom of information. And so, for example, behind graphic health warnings is Kenyans must be informed about what is in the products that they're consuming. And so the Bill of Rights also applies. And then in terms of structures, we have got the Division of Drugs and Substance Abuse within the Ministry of Health, which is the focal point for tobacco control. And this is the government department that communicates with WHO, that represents Kenya at meetings abroad, and that coordinates tobacco control activities in the country. So this one is not contained in the Act. It's an administrative structure within the ministry. And then within the Act, we've got the Tobacco Control Board in Section 5 and Section 6. And those sections basically say where the membership comes from. So drawn from a wide range of government entities that have a role in tobacco control, and also with civil society representation. And then we have the Tobacco Control Fund. And the source of the fund, in addition to parliamentary appropriations, is 2% of the tobacco industry profits annually. And so we created the fund to ensure that there will be sustainable financing for tobacco control, not just sustainable, but predictable. So basically you wait until BAT publishes their financial statements, then we calculate 2% of what they made, and they transfer that to the government. So we start off with Article 8, protection from exposure to tobacco smoke. And this article came in because the evidence shows us that tobacco smoke causes death, disease, and disability, not just for the smoker, but also for secondhand smokers, so anyone who breathes it in. And so given that tobacco smoke is dangerous, there's a duty to protect the public from tobacco smoke, and this duty is grounded in the right to life and the right to the highest attainable standard of health. And so the obligation is to protect people from exposure to tobacco smoke in indoor workplaces, in public transport, in indoor public places, and as appropriate, other public places. Now, the reason why these things are important is all about the definition. And so when, for example, you're looking at indoor, how we have defined an indoor place is anything that has got 3 walls and a roof. So, for example, when you're waiting for a bus, so you remember those old bus stops for KBS, which has got a metal container, which is covered on 3 sides. By virtue of the fact it has 3 walls and a roof, it has just become an indoor place. So you can't actually smoke there. Or if you're on a restaurant veranda, so they have put chairs outside, but the veranda is covered. Then the mere fact that that portion of the restaurant that looks outside is covered by the roof or the balcony, and it has got some sides, that makes it indoor. Then public transport, indoor public places, and then as appropriate, other public places. So how public is defined is any place that the public ordinarily has access to, even if at that point in time, there is no member of the public inside. So for example, a market. A market is not indoor, but members of the public are normally found in markets. So then you cannot smoke in a market. Article 8, the guidelines have some principles. So the first is we need 100% smoke-free environment. And this is because there is no safe level of exposure to tobacco smoke. And so for the measures to be effective, remember I told you the word effective is written into every article. We need total elimination of smoking and tobacco smoke in any of the places where smoking is banned. And therefore, approaches that allow for it not to be 100%. So for example, designated smoking areas or providing for ventilation, the evidence shows that they're ineffective. I normally say that if someone is in the swimming pool and I urinate in my corner, and then I say in your corner, you're fine, I've just polluted the water. So that's the same thing with air. If somebody is smoking in one corner, the air is going to reach the other corner. And so the solution is 100% smoke-free. So smokers must get out of where the public is found. So the guidelines talk about a timeline. And so this is one of the time-bound measures within the convention. And so within 5 years of the FCTC entering into force for a party, they must adopt a ban on smoking in public. So Kenya met this requirement. We ratified in 2004 and we got the law in 2007. Can there be any exemptions? The answer is no. There are no exemptions that are justified for whatever reason. And if there are any, they should be minimal and parties should remove them as soon as possible. So the guidelines also talk about enforcement, and I don't know how to remove this here. It's covering my screen. The law should apply to affected establishments and to smokers. And so, for example, the person in charge of an establishment, so say you're the manager of a restaurant or the owner of a school or the owner of a hotel or the makanga or the driver, this is what applies to you. So you must post no smoking signs at entrances and other locations. And the law provides how the sign should look like. You should remove ashtrays because this indicates that smoking is acceptable. So if you enter a restaurant or a hotel and you see an ashtray, that's an offense. The owner of the establishment must supervise observance of the rules. So they can't say they're helpless or they cannot do anything. And they must take reasonable steps to prevent smoking in their premises, e.g. asking a person who is smoking to leave, discontinuing service to them, or calling the police to arrest them. We also need to have a system for monitoring compliance and prosecuting violators. And normally this is the role of public health officers. They normally go visiting establishments. So for example, restaurants to see if there are ashtrays, whether they have put up signage. And of course, if you're caught smoking in public by Kanjo, you will end up in the city court. You should also specify fines or other monetary penalties, and this should be large enough to deter violations. And your law should also provide for administrative sanctions, such as suspending the business license. So if you find that you went to a restaurant, you warned them that people are smoking there, they should stop. You come the second time and find they are still allowing smokers, you can suspend that business license. And there should also be criminal penalties, depending on how offensive the behavior is. So this is how we have fulfilled our obligations in the Tobacco Control Act. So section 32 to 35 of the Tobacco Control Act and section 15 to 19 of the regulations adopted in 2014 provide the ban on smoking in public. So section 32 provides the right to a smoke-free environment. And because it is a right, this means that you as a citizen can take the government to court if your right is not being respected. And so I remember in Kenya, before we got the act in 2007, we got the government to do regulations. And I know in Uganda, they sued their government and basically said, under our right to a smoke-free environment, why isn't the government adopting some tobacco control law? And so an order was issued and the Minister of Environment was told to produce regulations. So this is actually something that you can litigate. And then section 33 lists the areas in which smoking is prohibited, and it covers all those areas I mentioned under the definition of what indoor public is. So it's a long list from schools, educational facilities, churches, markets, recreational facilities, and so on. And then the tobacco control regulations increased the places to include private vehicles with kids on board, because remember in the Act in section 33, it talks of public. So people were smoking in their private cars and saying gari ni yangu. So now we are saying if children are present, ataka gari ni yako, you can't smoke inside it. And then because we've got a lot of restaurants that were allowing people to smoke on the balcony, streets and verandas adjacent to a public place were also added to the list. Section 34 deals with no smoking notices, which are supposed to be displayed in public places. And then the penalties provided for smoking in public, which is 50,000 Kenya shillings or 6 months imprisonment. And then the regulations banned ashtrays, put an obligation on owners or managers to take measures to discourage smoking in public, and also said that if you decide to set up a designated smoking area, then you have to get a certificate from the Ministry of Health that it complies with the law. So in terms of the weaknesses of our smoke-free provisions, it's basically that provision for designated smoking areas. And the reason that is a weakness is, remember, smoke-free should be 100%. So it is impossible for a designated smoking area to be 100% smoke-free. And if you've gone to that one at Jivanji, or you've gone to the one near your house, from far you can already smell the smoke. So since a designated smoking area cannot possibly comply, there's no reason to provide for them, but we did. And so that's the one weakness in the Kenyan law. And then because the sentence is not described as a minimum, very often magistrates give offenders light sentences. So you find someone was smoking in public, they are fined 500 bob. So then, of course, they'll repeat again. And so trying to see how we can ensure that the 50,000 is a minimum, so that we get harsher sentences. The next article is Article 11 on packaging and labeling. And we start off with, why did we require this? And so when you look at these packages, they look very beautiful. Huh? And so packaging is like a mini billboard. So especially when we banned advertising on mainstream media, so you can't see it on TV, you don't hear about it on radio, they can't even use magazines. The only thing that they were left with for the tobacco industry to communicate to their consumers was the packet. And so they became very creative about how to use the packet in terms of colors, in terms of texture, in terms of shape, in terms of design features. And so realizing that the tobacco industry uses the packet as its final method of communicating with the smoker. And noting also that this is then a cheap form of advertising for the industry, because the smoker actually pays for the packet. So they get advertising at the cost of the smoker. We then also realized that a pack-a-day smoker looks at a pack 7,300 times a year. So you can imagine a pack has got 20 cigarettes, and even if you assume that he smokes one packet a day, then he look at the packet that number of times. And so if the tobacco industry can use that opportunity, that every time the smoker fishes out his packet to advertise to their consumers, we should also be using the same opportunity to talk to the consumer. Now, Article 11 has two broad objectives. So the first is to communicate health information to the consumer, and I'll come back to that. And the second is to prevent misleading packaging and labeling. So to prevent the tobacco industry using the packet to mislead. And so, for example, they should not have information that is false or misleading. And this could include information that creates an erroneous impression about the characteristics of a product or health effects. So you can imagine if you saw a cigarette packet written organic. For those in the health field, they may think that organic tobacco is better than GMO tobacco. The truth is, whether it's organic, whether it's GMO, there's no healthy tobacco. But that adding of the word organic may make people think that this one is healthy. Terms or descriptors like low tar, light, slims, mild may make someone think that iko na less chemicals than the other one. So all of that is misleading packaging and labeling. And once we banned the use of these terms, low tar, light, ultralight, they then shifted to colors. And that's why if you look at cigarettes, say like Marlboro, they've got Marlboro red, Marlboro blue, Marlboro black, Marlboro silver, Marlboro gold. And so what this communicates to the smoker, based on those colors, ile red ni deadly, eh? So the red one must be very strong. And then ile gray, that one looks light, so that one must be a bit nicer. And so trying to prevent them from being able to pass erroneous impressions is part of what Article 11 is about. Then the second thing is then about the actual health warnings. And so the guidelines provide on how health warnings should look like. And as I said, because the tobacco industry uses this to communicate brand names, to communicate certain things on the packet. We want to use the packet for health education instead of marketing. And so when we put those ugly, some have called them scary pictures, we are then telling the smoker about what to expect when they use the product. And in addition to which, we then get free IEC from the industry because our messaging is being done not at our cost. So the guidelines provide some information on how health warnings should look like to be effective. And so the first thing that they say is how they should look like. And so they should be large, clear, visible, and legible. So if you've seen a Kenyan packet, the warnings are not clear. Sometimes it's hard to tell really what they're showing. I wish I had a picture here. And then they are very small. So in the case of Kenya, they are 30% on the front, 50% on the back. And so the quality is not good. So we've already fallen foul of this provision. Then secondly, they are supposed to be pictures and not just text. So when Kenya started, we started off with that small sentence, Ministry of Health warning, cigarette smoking is harmful to your health. Now, if you've got a high level of illiterate people, then if they can't read, they don't get the warning. And so we need to have pictures and not just text. Pictures are more effective. They're also more noticeable. They create more emotional impact, easily understood. And as I said, they work where there is low literacy. Then in terms of languages, they should be in all the principal languages of the country. In the case of Kenya, that's English and Kiswahili. And then the messages should address a range of issues, e.g. messages tailored to gender, age, or particular groups. So for example, in Kenya, a gendered message would be something like, cigarette smoking harms your unborn baby, because that is speaking to pregnant women, but it doesn't speak to men. So if you're the tobacco industry, then given that the majority of smokers in Kenya are men, you would like only those ones. You would make sure you print only the one, cigarette smoking harms your unborn baby. So then the men will think, I've got no problem with cigarettes. Cigarettes are only bad for pregnant women. And that's why you must speak to every gender, every age, and every other kind of different demographic. And so if you look at, for example, these ones, you've got cigarettes are highly addictive. You have got, this is now the equivalent of that in French. This was from Canada. And when you look at the Kenyan warnings, they cover a wide range of issues. And then they should be clear, concise, and culturally appropriate. So if I can explain what that means, a company was trying to sell baby formula. So they put images of a baby on the formula tin. And then they were wondering why no one was buying their formula. So within that context, people, when they saw the tin with a fat smiling baby on it, thought that there's a baby inside the tin. So you can, of course, understand why they didn't want to buy babies in tins. So these people had not done any testing to figure out how people would take a picture of a baby on a tin. And so that's what we mean by culturally appropriate. So you may think you're communicating something by a certain image, and the people to whom you're talking are reading it in a different way. And then, as I said, gender-specific risks. So the size is also important. And so the FCTC says 50% plus, but no less than 30% of the principal display area. And as I said, the FCTC is a floor, not a ceiling. So you can go above 50%. And what we know is that the larger, the better. Effectiveness increases with size. You need to be careful about placement and location. So they should be on all the principal display areas. So if it's the normal cigarette packet, it would be the front and the back. If they make a hexagonal packet, it would be on all 5 panels of the packet. So that's why they call it principal display area. They say that it should be at the top. Now there's a lot of controversy over this. If you put it at the bottom, then they'll make sure when they are stacking it on the shelf that the health warning is covered by the part of the shelf. If you put it at the top, the challenge may be when they're opening the packet, it breaks the health warning. And sometimes if you have to put a tax stamp, it could cover the warning. So Those are the things you need to think about. And you need to change the warnings from time to time. And so this talks about rotation. And so if the health warnings stay in the market long enough, people get used to them. So they stop having that shock value. They just get used to it. So you need to periodically change the warnings. Then the last thing in the guidelines is the recommendation for what is called plain or standardized packaging. And from those packages that you can see, it basically means that these are measures that restrict or prohibit the use of logos, colors, brand images, etc. So if you look at this packet, you can see there is the logo in a small font, and then all the cigarette packets, irrespective of the company, this is from Australia, would be this ugly shade of green. So in fact, when they were describing it in the regulations, they called it olive green. And then the olive industry protested and said, olives are good things. That is not olive green. Call it something else. So anyway, you pick an ugly color and all the packets, irrespective of the brand, must be that same color. So if you compare to these ones, I want to get a nice packet. You can see one. You remember my first packets? These ones.
Yeah.
So you can see this one is white and blue, and they even have the word there, blue. You can see these ones have blue, green, nice designs. So plain packaging would avoid, you can see the font here, Capri looks nice, Camel here. So you're trying to avoid all of that. So irrespective of whether it is different companies or not, they must all look standard, must look the same. So they can't use font, they can't use color, they can't use anything else to attract the consumer. And it basically increases effectiveness of the health warning, and it addresses misleading packaging techniques of the industry. So what has Kenya done on health warnings? So Section 21 provides for health warnings in English and Kiswahili. So we've met the requirement for principal languages. In terms of size, the current health warnings are 30% front, 50% back. In terms of where they are located on the lower portion of the package. Remember, they said they want them at the top. And then all warning labels available are supposed to be displayed. And what this means is that whenever we are generating the health warnings, so the first ones in Kenya were a list of about 15, is it 10 text warnings. When we did the pictorials, we had a sample of, we had about 15. And in this next round that has just come out, again, we have a fresh set of, I think, 15. And then we've given the cabinet secretary, who's a minister, the power to prescribe fresh health warnings and can prescribe pictures. And so we got pictures in the second round. We also have a requirement that every package is to bear a statement as to the constituents, so the ingredients like tar or nicotine, but not their quantities. So the reason we don't want to put quantities is people will compare. So if they see this one has got 5 grams of tar and the other one has got 10 grams, they'll think the one with 5 grams is better, yeah? But we've all agreed even one cigarette is bad. So people knowing the quantities is not important because that's misleading. And then Section 23 has a general prohibition on misleading packaging, including the use of those terms light, low tar, and so on. So in terms of where we are falling short, remember we talked about regularly changing the health warnings to avoid them losing their impact. And so in the 2007 Act, we started out with text warnings. And so the first ones came out in 2007, and it was just text. And then the next ones was in 2014. And from there we moved to, so the 2014 ones were pictures. But because of the court case that Celine mentioned, we got only partial implementation. So out of the full set of 15, the tobacco industry only put 6 on the packets. And so they ignored the rest. And then in terms of size, and they picked which 6 they put. So for example, I don't think they put the one on tobacco use causes impotence. And that one is a message for men because most Kenyan men want to have offspring. So in picking and choosing, they avoided that one to avoid talking to the men. And then the size is still too small. So Kenya is ranked 138 in the world for graphic health warnings. And this is 138 out of about 190 countries. So because of that 3050, our size is very small. So in 2025, we got new graphic health warnings gazetted. So this helps us cure the problem of the old warnings had zilikuwa zimechoka. People were no longer getting the impact. But the main problem is we still don't have an implementation date. So normally when a gazette notice is issued, it should say from when we should expect to see the packets. So the gazette notice that we saw didn't have that. So we have no idea by when the packets should change. We also didn't have an indication of size in that gazette notice. And therefore, our understanding is then that the new ones will still be 3050, yet we had been lobbying for bigger, and the size we had wanted to go for was 80%. And then the good thing is that we now have health warnings for e-cigarettes and nicotine pouches. So anyway, we are following up with the ministry and we'll ask you to join in that advocacy for us to get the final gazette notice that has the implementation date, that has the size, so that we can start monitoring the packets, whether the industry is complying. Let's go to Article 13. So Article 13 deals with tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. And the reason why we ban advertising is that this is an industry that kills 50% of its consumers just by the nature of their product. And so they need to attract new customers to replace the ones who die or those who manage to quit so that they can maintain their sales and profits. And so at the core of the industry strategy is advertising, promotion, and sponsorship to sell products. And so the FCTC Article 13 guidelines note that tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship increase tobacco use, while a comprehensive ban decreases tobacco use. And the studies have actually been carried out showing the impact once you ban advertising. So I'm assuming most of the people on this call are much younger than me, and therefore you have not seen tobacco advertising the way I saw it in my youth. And so part of the reason why we have such low smoking rates among adolescents particularly is because they have never seen advertising. So even when you ask them, unajua sigara, they'll tell you fegi. But if you ask for a brand name, they don't know them by brands. So the way me, I would tell you, kuna Sportsman, kuna Roaster, kuna Dunhill, our kids just say cigarette. They don't know brand names. And so we've been successful with our advertising ban. So an advertisement is defined as any form of commercial communication, a recommendation or action, which has the aim, effect, or likely effect of promoting a tobacco product or tobacco use, either directly or indirectly. So for example, if you can see this picture on the left, that is an advertisement, yeah? So when you see the words, same iconic taste, that is promotional language to tell you, even though we have been told to put a health warning, it still tastes as good as the previous one, yeah? When you look at the colors communicate something. So that's why when we are saying any form of communication, it could be written, it could be spoken, it could be the colors, it could be the arrangement. It's a very broad definition. And it has the aim or effect of promoting a tobacco product, in that case, a brand name. So promoting the name Marlboro so that there's name recognition, or promoting tobacco use. Yeah. So keep that in mind when you think about the ad ban. And then sponsorship is any form of contribution to an event, activity, or individual with the aim, effect, or likely effect of promoting a tobacco product or tobacco use. So you can see here, this is Ferrari. Unfortunately, Formula One still has tobacco advertising. And so when the whole team is branded Marlboro, that act of sponsoring the competition, which then entitles them to put their logos and their colors everywhere, is what promotes the tobacco product or tobacco use. So there's a difference between advertising, sponsorship, and promotion. So what the guidelines tells us is that we have to cover all types of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. So look at it like a balloon. If you squeeze one end of the balloon, the air simply rushes to the other side. So if you don't cover all possible forms, when you ban one type, they simply find another way. So you need to ban television, you need to ban written materials, you need to ban music and entertainment, you need to ban telephone advertising, you need to ban the radio. Are you still hearing me? My power has gone.
Yes.
Okay, I think the generator is kicking
Yes.
in. Yeah, so if you lose me, okay, it's come back. You need to ban the internet. So basically your ban needs to be comprehensive, because remember I talked about the balloon.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you leave anything out, they'll use the exception or the loophole, yeah? And so the FCTC says that we must have a comprehensive ban within 5 years of entry into force of the FCTC for that party. So again, Kenya respected because we did this in 2007. And then it talks about cross-border advertising. So for example, a TikTok video shot in Tanzania, but we can see it on TikTok. That's cross-border advertising. Or we can get a Ugandan TV station or radio in Busia. That's cross-border advertising. And then, of course, the internet is the biggest source of cross-border. Yeah? So cross-border is difficult just because if it's happening in another country, how do you stop it? But either way, it needs to be covered. And then some countries like the US are not able to ban advertising completely because of how their constitution is written. And so they're told those who can't ban it should then apply restrictions. The good news for Kenya is we have got no reason why we can't ban comprehensively. Our constitution is different from that of the US. And so Kenya is able to ban comprehensively. So these are some of the things we need to ensure are covered so that our ban is comprehensive. So the first is retail, sale, and display. And the reason why we need to ban it is because it stimulates impulse purchases. So you have seen this, that when you're at the checkout counter at the supermarket, wamekuwekea peremende. So of course they are hoping that if you're there with a child, the minute they see the sparkles and chupa chups, they start whining, "Mama, what chocolate?" And then you can't say no. So you'll buy even though you are not intended to buy it. And so what this does for a smoker is that when they see these packets repeatedly, it will then trigger that urge to smoke and they'll buy a packet. And so you try to avoid retail display. And when they are displayed everywhere, it gives the impression that tobacco use is socially acceptable. And this really targets young people because then they'll be doing these retail displays near products that attract young people like the sweets or at the checkout counter. And some of the solutions to avoiding them being able to do this is putting it in the law that there can be no retail, sale, and display, saying that they must be hidden in a cupboard. So if you want it, you come up to the cashier and say, nataka Marlboro, anakupatia. So you can't see them. They shouldn't be seen anywhere. The next thing you have to avoid is something called brand stretching and brand sharing. And so brand stretching refers to connecting a tobacco brand with a non-tobacco product. So for example, you can see this shop on your left, yeah? It's a shop selling clothes, but it's branded Marlboro. So what they are trying to do, because they have been prohibited from advertising Marlboro as a cigarette, but they still want people to remember Marlboro as a brand, is clothes are not tobacco products. It's a non-tobacco product, but they've branded it Marlboro. There's also some perfumes. I know there's a perfume called Dunhill. And so when they do that, they're just keeping brand names alive. And so you need to prohibit that. Now, the vice versa of brand stretching is brand sharing, where you connect a non-tobacco brand with a tobacco product. So, for example, you have got Altria. Altria is the parent company of Philip Morris. So you then find Altria has got one division, Philip Morris, making tobacco products, and then they decide to start a brand of unga, also called Altria. So unga is a healthy food. Philip Morris is also making it. They're also making cigarettes. So that way they confuse the public. Altria cannot be bad. I mean, they make unga. Unga is good. And so If you're a tobacco product company, you should only be doing tobacco products. You should not be able to use your name on other things that are otherwise good for the public because of that confusion. So you should ban that also. And then Celine mentioned corporate social responsibility. So you should ensure that tobacco industry CSR is also banned. And that's because CSR is a form of sponsorship. And then the publicity that they get for their CSR is advertising and promotion. Then you should also ensure you've dealt with internet sales. And this is where we're having a big problem in Kenya, because to sell on the internet, you have to advertise, and then you also cannot monitor whether you're selling to minors. And so the provisions on age verification will be broken if you allow products to be sold by the internet. And so if you try to buy e-cigarettes in Kenya, for example, so just type e-cigarette store in Kenya, you'll get 2 or 3. And so when you land on that site, there's a pop-up that says sales only allowed to people over 18. Then they give you 2 buttons, under 18, over 18. There's no means of verifying. So if you're under 18 and you click over 18, the site just opens. So they've got no proper way of verifying who they are selling to. And so many of our minors are getting e-cigarettes and nicotine pouches over the internet. And that's why you have to ban internet sales. It's also impossible to ensure that there is a tax stamp. And so there can be tax evasion and also sale of illicit products such as counterfeits. The last thing you need to ensure is that you have banned a depiction of tobacco in entertainment media. So here you can see this is some film from India, Bollywood. One of the things that we are seeing in Kenya is Nollywood, those Niger movies. Some of them had smoking scenes. And so when you show tobacco in films, in theater, in games, it influences young people to think tobacco use is cool. So for ladies, they see that young man with the six-pack, the muscles, and he's smoking, and they think a cool boyfriend smokes. The reality, a boyfriend who smokes, his mouth stinks. Nobody wants to kiss a stinky mouth. So that's not a cool boyfriend. And if yours is smoking, please dump him and get a better version. So trying to discourage this, so you should ban it. And the ways in which you do that is you have a rating system. So anything that has got smoking scenes is rated, I think good films are PG, is mbaya ni R, sio? You can also ban it, and if that film is shown, you can find the theater. And so the encouragement is ban depicting tobacco brands in films or require anti-tobacco advertisements. But what I prefer to go for is just ban it. So I know Nigerian advocates have been working hard, and they've managed to get a ban on tobacco smoking in Nollywood films. But of course, if they land here in Kenya, we need to ensure that they are not being shown. So if you're ever watching TV and you see an Hollywood film that has got smoking in it, you can report to Ezekiel Mutua. I don't know whether he's still there or whoever took over after him at the Kenya Film Classification Board, and that film should be pulled from the Kenyan market. So the guidelines also say you have to cover everybody who's responsible for this advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. And so primary responsibility lies with the tobacco industry or the manufacturers, distributors, importers, and retailers, because they're the ones who initiate the advertising. But you also need to put responsibility on entities that produce or publish the media content, so that they don't include such kind of content in what they publish. You should ensure it also covers event organizers, sports people, or celebrities who would be being featured in this advertisement, promotion, or sponsorship. And yeah, so ensure that every person is covered by your provisions. So this is what Kenya has done. So Kenya was one of the countries that had a very comprehensive ban on taps. And remember, we're passing this law in 2007. So even at 2007, we wrote the law very well. We tried to cover everything. So Section 24 bans testimonials or endorsements. And what this is you featuring a celeb. So you can imagine Omanyala wearing sportsman branded gear. That's a endorsement, yeah? And because Omanyala is popular in Kenya, he's good looking in my opinion. I've got a husband, so I'm not interested in him in that way. But I think he's good looking. There are some ladies who, if they see Omanyala with sportsman, may think, yeah, that's a good idea. So you want to avoid celebrities, popular people endorsing products. And then in educational, artistic, or literary works, you want to avoid showing tobacco products or brands. So I remember attending a play at the Kenya National Theatre, and there was a smoking scene. So this was the younger Rachel who used to cause a scene. So during the halftime, I marched up to the person in charge of the play and said, you have to stop this. Number one, the Kenya National Theatre is a closed setting, so they are smoking in public. But number two, this is a breach of Section 24. So they're like, no, in that scene, the guy is stressed, so we are trying to show his stress by him smoking. I said, it is banned. Artistic, literary works, you cannot depict smoking or tobacco products. And I said, if you don't stop it right now, I'm calling the public health officers and this play is being stopped. So my friends are looking at me, why is Rachel causing a scene? I'm like, no, we have to stop this kind of thing. So any place you see that happening, it's not allowed. Schools doing music festival, you cannot write in a smoking scene. That is a breach of this Section 24. And Section 25 bans advertising in any form of electronic or print media. And remember, I showed you that whole list, ranging from telephones to radios to TVs to the internet to video games. And we've also banned lifestyle advertising. So for example, they're trying to sell a car and they have a young lady dressed in a red miniskirt perched on the bonnet of a Honda. What's the relationship between smoking and Honda? So that's lifestyle advertising. Then Section 26 bans sponsorship of cultural, sporting, recreational, or entertainment events, trade fairs, or promoting tobacco products through such events. And in Kenya, where we are struggling is with the show. They're still using the show to sponsor. And even on Labor Day, you'll find the BAT brings their workers branded in BAT colors. So that is misuse of this provision. Then Section 27, names of tobacco manufacturers can only appear on a facility if they own or lease it. So for example, the name BAT cannot appear on a supermarket, cannot appear on a small kiosk because they don't own it. Then Section 28 bans sale or distribution of accessories that bear tobacco brand names. So an accessory is something like a lighter, a matchbox, an ashtray. It's basically something that facilitates smoking. So you cannot have branded ashtrays, branded matchboxes, so that the cigarette is called Marlboro, and then there's a line of matchboxes called Marlboro, and they're sold together. And Section 29 prohibits brand stretching and brand sharing. Section 30 bans sale promotions. So buy one, get one free, or giving discounts, price discounts. So all of those are promotions. And then Section 31 bans promotion through communication media, including cross-border advertising. So this is radio, TV, the internet, magazines, so on. So before I go to the remaining provisions, because I've covered the three big ones, where we are having a challenge with advertising and promotion and sponsorship in Kenya is CSR is still happening. So you saw there Battle of the Minds. We still have challenges policing the internet, and so online sales are still happening. And particularly a lot of advertising and promotion is going on through the internet. And as I've said, we still occasionally have movies that have content that's not allowed. So there are some enforcement challenges, particularly with new media, and then just the whole social media scene. So TikTok influencers being used, and they're not even filming in the country. Let's go to illicit trade. And Benja, it is 2056. Can I ask for 10 minutes, which would take us to 2106?
Yes, I would request the participants to be patient for the extra 10 minutes so that we're able to cover everything completion.
Okay. So I'd mentioned there's an illicit trade protocol that's kind of like a baby to the FCTC. For you to be a party to the protocol, you must first be a party to the FCTC. And because it's a separate protocol, you also have to sign and ratify it. And so Kenya helped negotiate that protocol, and we signed it in 2020. So it's got a lot of measures. A lot of them are excessively legal, so that's why I didn't go into them here. But it's basically trying to regulate the supply chain of tobacco products, all the way from how you monitor tobacco leaf to how you monitor the machines that are used to make tobacco products to monitoring the actual products in terms of cigarettes. And so what illicit trade is in terms of the definition is any tobacco product that does not meet the laws and regulations of a country. So some of the more obvious laws and regulations are taxes. So any product that has not paid taxes is illicit, but it could also be breaches of intellectual property. So for example, counterfeited products. So it's called Marlboro instead of Marlboro. And so it's stealing the copyright of the tobacco industry. But we are not, as public health, really concerned with whether someone steals the copyright of BAT. A cigarette, whether Marlboro or Marlboro, will still kill you. Either way, that would be illicit. And then maybe it has no health warnings. So any requirement, or it's not in plain packaging if plain packaging is enforced. So if a product does not meet any of the laws of a country, it is illicit. And so the method of trying to prevent this, and the reason why illicit trade is bad, is that if they have not paid taxes, they're going to be cheap. So for example, we're having a conversation the other day. A packet of Sportsman costs 350. There's a brand called Oris that costs 100 bob. So obviously, if someone is broke, wataenda kununua ile ka 100 bob. And so it makes there be cheap products. And so not only are there being cheap products, which means even children can afford them, but the government is also not getting its revenue. And so illicit products are a problem. The second reason they're a problem is that very often people who trade in one illicit product trade in other illicit products. So if they are trading in illicit cigarettes, they are highly also involved in illegal guns. They are also involved in counterfeit medicine. And so just a chain of criminality. And so when people are smuggling things over one border or the other, they'll carry a whole range of illegal products. And what we found, particularly in the East African region, is that because a lot of the illicit trade is, so you've got Kenya, you've got South Sudan where there is a war going on, you've got DRC where there is civil war, a lot of these militia and warlords, to get the money that they need to fund the war, engage in illicit trade. So it's not just a public health issue, it's also a security threat because these are criminals, and they're also trafficking guns, bad medicines, and so on. So for all of those reasons, illicit trade is our issue as tobacco control people. And then lastly, because the tobacco industry uses it to lobby against tobacco taxes. So that may come up tomorrow on the session on taxation. And that is why, despite the FCTC being largely a health treaty, we have some provisions on illicit trade and eventually came up with a protocol. And so in trying to cover that supply chain, from everything that goes into making a tobacco product to ensuring that that tobacco product is sold legally, you've got a protocol covering all those aspects. And so covering everything from licensing everybody across that chain, which means you not only have to license BAT as the manufacturer, you need to get people who distribute to have licenses. Eventually, you can decide that even retailers have to be licensed so that you know how many people are selling. And a big one for Kenya could be even street vendors. If they're going to sell tobacco products, they need to be licensed. The requirements for keeping documentation. So if you ordered 10 boxes of cigarettes, we want to see the invoice, the LPO, the receipt for payment. We want to know who you paid. We want bank documents just so that we can track whether you're selling to legitimate people or you're selling it to some warlord in DRC. And then the biggest one is a track and trace system. And so what the track and trace system does is that when products, so Kenya manufactures for about 27 countries, 15 in Africa, the rest externally. And so BAT will say, hypothetically, we've produced 1 million cigarettes, yeah? And then they'll say, out of those million, 500,000 are for the Kenyan market and 500,000 are for export. So the only way you can tell that the 500,000 that they said are for export actually left the country, they were exported, is you have to be able to track them. So from the BAT factory, you need to have a system where tax stamps are put on them for those that are for the Kenyan market. And then there is a barcode system, yeah, that determines the date that the product was produced, the batch number, the place of manufacture, and the country of origin. So it would say made in Kenya at, I don't know, their factory is on Mombasa Road on 26th of January. And you can even say intended for sale only in Kenya. So if that product is found in Uganda, then it is illicit because it was only supposed to be sold in Kenya. Or if it's written for export and then we find it in Eldoret, then it means that it is illicit. And so that whole chain of tracking products from when they leave the factory as they travel through Kenya up to the border for those for export is a track and trace system. And then there are barcodes, there's technology, and so on. So this protocol says you must have a track and trace system. And then the other provisions in the Kenyan law is packages for sale in Kenya must indicate sales only allowed in Kenya, and those that come from outside must say where they were made. So if it comes from China, it should say made in China. And then the tobacco control regulations now talks about those markings. And in Kenya, if you look at them, on the top of a cigarette packet, there is a kind of barcode, which you should be able to scan, and it will give you all of this information. So the other day, we're looking at some packets of Sportsman, and when we tried scanning them, they were not scanning, which means that was a fake barcode, which told us that that product was illicit. So Kenya has one of the best track and trace systems in the world. People keep on coming here to learn from us. KRA has received a World No Tobacco Day award because of that track and trace system, but we still have illicit trade in Kenya because of porous borders. So as I mentioned, products leave Kenya, going to Uganda, down to DRC, then they come back. There's another route up through South Sudan, kuna ingine ya Ethiopia. And because there's just civil wars, if at Somalia going on all around us, the challenge is when we can track them from the Kenyan factory to the border. We can't track them as they come back in. The issues also of corruption. So we are currently facing a bit of an illicit trade problem, and there's need for better enforcement. So finally, as I close, there are a few other provisions in the Act. So you've got provisions on information, education, and communication, section 9 to 11. And this basically mandates the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, local authorities, and the healthcare system to provide information on the dangers of tobacco use. We have section 12 that says the Minister of Finance should utilize tax and price measures to reduce tobacco use. You'll hear more about taxation tomorrow. We have section 13 that provides for alternative livelihoods for tobacco farmers, and we are doing something about that in Kenya, in Migori. And then we have section 15 that prohibits sales to or by minors, including sales of tobacco products that resemble sweets or toys that would appeal to children. We have the requirement to put a sign saying that you cannot sell to minors. So this should be in every supermarket and every kibanda. We have banned sales by vending machine. We have banned single stick sales. So they should be sold in a minimum of 10, but this is broken all the time. We've banned self-service display, so you shouldn't be able to just pick it from the shelf. If you want it, you must ask the cashier coupe. We have banned mail deliveries of tobacco products. So remember when I said you can buy e-cigarettes online, this is actually breaching section 20, because for the internet site to sell it to you, they have to send it to you by Nduthi. That's a mail delivery. And then we have in the tobacco control regulations, some information that the tobacco industry must provide to the Ministry of Health on the contents of their products. And then Celine touched on the provisions to prevent tobacco industry interference with tobacco control policies. And then lastly, we've got provisions on enforcement, which I won't go into because they are legal and boring. We are done, and maybe I can take some questions.
Wow. I said if the first session was exciting, this one is going to be super exciting. And it has been a deep dive. We've covered so much that take many people a lot of time to learn within just the last 1 hour and a few minutes. And I would like to say thank you so much, Rachel, for that broad coverage. It's like we've ran a whole lot of marathons, like 10, 15 marathons in one single session. So I truly, truly appreciate the breadth and depth of that coverage. I want to open this up to some questions, and already there are a few. So the first question is, as we're heading to the World No Tobacco Day, what strategies can be implemented at county level to protect youth and children from tobacco industry interference and exposure? And secondly, what are the main barriers to enforcing the tobacco control laws at the county level, particularly in relation to capacity, funding, awareness, interagency coordination? How can we address these challenges through the county governments and community-led strategies? Particularly Mombasa. Mombasa is a culprit. So that's a very deep, very exciting question for you, Rachel. You
Let me
may
start with
respond.
those two because I can see more are coming in.
Yeah.
So at the county level, because of devolution, and so part of the challenge we are facing is that the Act was written in 2007 before devolution, and then 2010 new constitution devolution. So the first thing is previously the enforcement officers were reporting to Afya House, and so public health officers in particular used to report to mkubwa wao huko Afya House. Now public health officers have been devolved to the counties, so they are employees of different county governments. And so sorting out the chain of communication, because the role of passing policy was left at MOH Nairobi, and then the role of enforcement has now moved to the counties. And so the first thing that at county level can be done is training of enforcement officers. And then also remember government workers move, transfer. So if you're looking at people like police, you could find after 3-4 years, the policeman who was in Nyakach has been moved to Modogashe. So due to that movement, you trained the county of Migori, and then you come back 3 years later, and all the police officers have been transferred. So the first thing at county level is to build capacity of county enforcement officers, and this ranges from the police to the Kanjo officers, whatever they are called, to those manning ports of entry, so airports and borders, and then of course the public health officers. Then the second thing is public awareness. And so especially public health officers, community health workers have got a role in public education and awareness. And so we also need to provide them with IEC materials. So one of the things we hear when we engage at counties is that IEC materials are in Nairobi. So when a new research comes out, we hold the launch in Nairobi, and copies of the report never reach mashinani. So they don't have the latest information in terms of the statistics, and sometimes even seeing the new products. So you'll be telling them shisha, na kuna mtu ako huko Ocha hajawahi ona how a shisha looks like. And so just that need to educate them so that then they can educate. And then third is a system of monitoring. And so being able to ensure inspections are happening, and this is a resource question. And when they do inspections and they find violators, people are being prosecuted. So again, they are county level courts. And the more we prosecute, then people get the message. So for World No Tobacco Day, one of the things we can do is the Ministry of Health always has one major celebration, and nowadays they're trying to rotate it. This year it will be at Eldoret, but we then need smaller World No Tobacco Days in all the counties. And in essence, this means that we as civil society have to step up. So this year, MOH will be in Eldoret. Ketka is organizing a function in Nairobi. We hope people in other counties can also organize something, because we use these events for education and awareness. And if you add on a kind of sting operation, it will also do some enforcement. So that's how we can use World No Tobacco Day, convene a small World No Tobacco Day where you are, and you can use it for those purposes. In terms of the barriers, the first is resourcing. So the Tobacco Control Fund is controlled by Afya House, and it's not getting to the counties. Yet we are expecting them to enforce. Now, enforcement requires resources, because if those police are to drive around in vehicles, kuna mtu inabidi abai mafuta. then if they're going to go and investigate shisha bars at night, kutakuwa na overtime. So who's going to pay for all of these things? Ideally, they should be paid out of the fund, but so far counties are not accessing the fund. And if within county budgets, they also don't provide for enforcement resources, then the public health officer wants to go out and enforce, but because he needs the police so that he can either A, arrest, or B, if it is at night, he can be safe, then if there's no proper resourcing, including providing a van to collect washukiwa, then it will not happen. So that's the first issue of funding. Then the second at capacity is training, that the fund should also be doing training at these levels and regularly. So the last proper training was in 2010. I think there could have been another round in 2015. Since then, nothing. So officers have been transferred, they were devolved to the counties, some retire, others die. So just a need for regular capacity building and of course the funding for it. Then the last thing is interagency coordination. And so you've seen a bit of that. NACADA has got a role, the Kenya Police have got a role, public health officers have got a role, Afya House hapa juu iko na role, county government. And so if you don't coordinate well in terms of who's going to resource it and how you do it and have a proper enforcement plan, then enforcement will not happen. And so one of the things that needs to happen immediately is some meetings with the Council of Governors and then at individual county level to sensitize on their role in enforcement and then eventually trainings at the county level. And one of the other things that they can do is to pass county legislation. Nimesema mingi, najua. And all of those would apply in Mombasa. Next one is Ruth. On the law restricting smokers from doing it in their vehicles, is there a law that empowers the children to raise the alarm? So remember I said you have got a right to a smoke-free environment, and that would also apply to children. So in terms of the law that allows them to raise the alarm, yes, through that right, and the Bill of Rights provides that anybody can go to court. Both as an individual, you can do a class action suit, civil society can take it to court. So if you have a children rights NGO, you can go to court on behalf of children. I think the bigger thing is the power relationship. So I don't know how children are brought up nowadays, but in my day, I can imagine trying to take my dad to court. Hiyo nyumba ikaliki. So the provision is good. The challenge is the enforcement. We've banned smoking in houses because if you've got a watch, a house is a workplace. So to you, your sitting room is for relaxing. If the watch is cleaning, that's a workplace. So if smoking in a workplace is banned, when the watch is in your house, smoking in your house is banned. Same problem. How will the watch tell you who pays a salary? Maze, toka inje. So that's the challenge that of the power relationship. So the law can only go so far. And so there's a critical need for empowerment. What I found is effective with children. Imagine your child comes home, you're running to greet them, you're smelling of smoke, and your child is like, ew, yucky. As a father, utaacha immediately. They won't even need to tell you anything about the law. Just the fact your kids don't want to hug you or they make that noise, most fathers will get the message. And so CBC is teaching our children. And so my children will come home and tell me, Mom, we want to eat chips, but we know it's not healthy. And so the more we do that with children, the children themselves will advocate and will speak. They'll tell their father, teacher said, and you know when teacher says, the children believe. Teacher said, Daddy, you go and smoke outside. And they'll say that when they are visitors, that man will never smoke inside the house. So I think that's the method to do that. Sorry, I don't know if David is a question. He's downloaded the framework convention. So what I will do, I will give to Benja a copy of the act of the regulations. The FCTC is also downloadable. All the guidelines are downloadable. I can compile all of them so he can send that to you. I would encourage you to read and understand them. Which other documents should we download to better our understanding of Kenya's role in implementing the international tobacco control policies? So you could check, there's something called ITC. Just Google Kenya ITC project. This was a survey. So ITC stands for International Tobacco Evaluation Project, and it was looking at the level of implementation of the Kenya's tobacco control measures. The other thing that you can look at, I'm referring you to a dashboard, and I'm typing it here in the chat. It has got a good page on enforcement. So this is www.kenya.tobaccocontroldata.org. This is a dashboard with a lot of tobacco control information on Kenya. So everything from the status of our enforcement, information on cessation, on prevalence, on tobacco farming, on taxes, very good source of information. Benja, over to you.
So much, Rachel. And thank you for sharing that resource. We look forward to the others that you will share with us so that we onward to the participants. We have quite a big group on WhatsApp that will enable us share easily these documents. So just to appreciate you for taking your time to give us this wealth of knowledge, to give us all these tools that we can leverage on to learn more and to be able to be even better advocates. I believe we are making very strategic, well-guided progress as we go on to the next areas of the tobacco control advocacy training for the young people, and that by the end of it, we'll have quite a good bunch that are able to engage and support advocacy work in the different policy areas, be it in taxation, be it in calling for proper implementation guidelines for the graphic health warnings and anything else, even those happening at the county level. So really, really thank you. I think given the time we've spent,